The blizzard should have killed her. It should have buried Marin beneath the ice and snow like every other forgotten Omega who wandered too far from civilization. But death had not come for her that night. Instead, something far more impossible had found her first. A baby, wrapped in blood-soaked silk, abandoned in a snowdrift, barely breathing. Marin had stumbled upon the infant by accident, guided only by a cry so faint it could have been the wind. The child's lips were blue. Its tiny fingers were curled into frozen fists. And there, glowing faintly on its chest beneath the torn fabric, was a mark she recognized instantly: the royal crest of Valdros. This was no common child. This was the stolen prince, the heir who had vanished 3 days ago and torn the kingdom apart in his absence. Marin should have left him. He should have walked away and let fate claim what it had already chosen. Touching this child would mean death if anyone discovered her. She was branded, exiled, a criminal in the eyes of every wolf who had ever known her name. But she couldn't. She reached down and pulled the baby against her chest. The moment her skin touched his, 3 things happened at once. The child gasped, his first real breath in what must have been hours. A warmth flooded through Marin's veins, something ancient and dormant stirring awake inside her. And 200 miles away, in the cold throne room of Valdros, Alpha King Theron of the Northern Realm collapsed to his knees as the mark on his chest burned white-hot for the first time since his son had been taken. He had felt it. The bond. His heir was alive. But he felt something else too. Something that shouldn't have been possible. A second thread. Faint, but undeniable. Pulling him toward a presence he didn't recognize. A connection that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with fate. His wolf stirred for the first time in days and whispered a single word. Mate. Marin had no idea what she had just done. She didn't know that saving this child would summon the most dangerous alpha in the realm to her doorstep. She didn't know that the moment she touched the prince, she had bound herself to a king who had sworn never to love again. And she certainly didn't know that the curse on his bloodline had already begun to awaken. Neither of them understood how impossible their fates had just become. 3 days earlier, Marin had stopped counting the weeks since her exile. Time meant nothing when every sunrise brought the same question. Would today be the day she finally starved? The cabin she'd found was barely standing. 4 walls of rotting timber, a roof that leaked when the wind blew wrong, and a hearth that consumed firewood faster than she could gather it. But it was shelter. More than she deserved, according to the wolves who had cast her out. She pulled her threadbare cloak tighter and stared at the empty pot hanging over the dying embers. No food since yesterday morning, no prospects of any today. The forest was frozen solid, the rivers locked beneath ice too thick to break. Winter in the borderlands was not a season, it was a death sentence. "You should have let them kill you," she murmured to herself. "Would have been faster." But Marin had never been good at giving up. Even when her pack had dragged her before the council, even when they'd pressed the brand into her forehead, marking her as what they believed her to be, even when her own mother had looked away as they threw her into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, she'd survived. The brand on her forehead throbbed in the cold, a jagged symbol that marked her as a Veilborn, one of the rare wolves born with abilities that defied nature, abilities that were forbidden. Abilities that, according to the laws of every pack in the realm, made her a monster. Marin touched the scar absently. She'd hidden it for 18 years, kept her power buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist. But then Brennan had died, and everything had fallen apart. She flinched at the memory. His face, his screams, and the fire that had consumed him from within while she stood frozen, unable to stop it. They said she'd killed him. Said her Veilborn magic had finally shown its true nature. But Marin hadn't done it. She knew she hadn't. Her power was healing, not destruction. She could mend wounds, ease pain, and coax life back into dying things. She couldn't set a man ablaze from the inside out. Someone else had killed Brennan, someone who wanted her gone, and they had succeeded. A gust of wind shrieked through the gaps in the cabin walls. Marin shivered and rose to her feet. She needed firewood or she'd freeze before starvation could claim her. Outside, the world was white and hostile. Snow came down in sheets so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. The cold bit through her clothing instantly, finding every gap, every weakness. She trudged toward the tree line, each step an effort. Her body was weakening. She could feel it. Weeks of barely eating had stripped the strength from her limbs. Her wolf, once a constant presence in her mind, had gone quiet days ago, conserving energy, preparing for the end. Marin had almost reached the first cluster of pines when she heard it, a cry. She stopped, her breath clouding in the frozen air. The wind howled around her, drowning everything else out. Then she heard it again. Faint. Fragile. Almost swallowed by the storm. A baby. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her feet were already moving, carrying her toward the sound against all logic. No one lived out here. No one traveled the borderlands in winter. And certainly no one brought an infant into this frozen wasteland. The cry led her past the trees, across a shallow ravine to a snowdrift that had formed against a cluster of rocks, and there, half buried in the white, was a bundle of silk. Marin's heart stopped. She dropped to her knees and dug frantically, her frozen fingers scraping through ice and snow until she uncovered the fabric beneath. Deep crimson, edged with gold threading, expensive, royal. Inside the silk was a baby, a boy, perhaps 3 or 4 months old. His skin was nearly gray, his lips tinged blue. His eyes were closed, his tiny body motionless except for the barest flutter of breath. He was dying. No, no, no. Marin pulled him against her chest, tearing open her cloak to press him against her skin, to share whatever warmth she had left. "Hold on, please hold on." The baby didn't respond. His breath was too shallow, his heartbeat too faint. And then she saw the mark, glowing softly on his chest, directly over his heart. A symbol she had seen only in books and whispered legends. The crest of the Valdros bloodline, the mark of the royal heir. This was the missing prince, the child who had been stolen from the palace 3 days ago, the son of the Alpha King himself. Marin's blood turned to ice. If anyone found her with this child, they wouldn't ask questions. They would assume the worst. The branded Omega found with the stolen prince? She'd be executed before sunrise. She should put him back. Should walk away and pretend she'd never found him. But his heart was fading. She could feel it. And her power, the gift she'd buried for so long, stirred in her chest like an ember refusing to die. "Forgive me," she whispered, and she pressed her palm over the mark on his chest. Light exploded through her veins. 200 miles away, in the frozen throne room of Valdros, Alpha King Theron was holding a knife to a traitor's throat when the mark on his chest ignited. The pain was instantaneous. A searing brand pressed directly against his heart. He staggered backward, the knife clattering from his fingers as his hand flew to his chest. "Your Majesty!" His commander, a scarred wolf named Corin, rushed forward. But Theron barely heard him. The mark was burning. Burning in a way it hadn't since the day his son was born, since the day the bond had first formed between them. For 3 agonizing days, that mark had been cold. Dead. A constant reminder of his failure, of the child he couldn't protect, of the heir who had vanished from his own palace while guards stood watch outside the door. But now, it was alive. And there was something else. A second sensation beneath the burn. A thread he didn't recognize. A pull toward something. Someone he'd never felt before. His wolf surged to the surface, more alert than it had been in days. The prince! Theron gasped. He's alive. Corin's eyes widened. You can feel him? Yes. Theron straightened, forcing himself to breathe through the pain. And something else. Someone touched him. Someone is with him right now. He turned to his commanders, his gray eyes blazing with a fury that had been building since the moment his son disappeared. Ready the horses. We ride north. Marin collapsed backward into the snow, gasping for breath. The light had faded. Her hands were shaking, her entire body trembling from the effort of what she'd just done. She hadn't used her power in years. I had almost forgotten what it felt like. But the baby. She looked down at the infant still cradled against her chest, and her breath caught. His skin was pink, his lips were no longer blue, and his eyes, dark and startling, were open for the first time, staring up at her with an intensity that should have been impossible for a child so young. He was alive, truly alive. I did it, she breathed. You're okay. You're going to be okay. The baby made a soft sound, something between a coo and a whimper, and nestled closer against her warmth. His tiny hand reached up, fingers curling around a strand of her dark hair. Marin felt something crack in her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and struggled to her feet. The storm was worsening. She needed to get him inside. I needed to warm him properly, feed him if she could find anything to give. The walk back to the cabin was agonizing. Her legs threatened to give out with every step. The effort of channeling her power had drained what little strength she had left, but she made it. She wrapped the baby in every scrap of fabric she could find, then built the fire higher than she'd dared in weeks, burning through her precious reserve of wood without a second thought. He needed it more than she did. As the flames crackled and the cabin slowly warmed, Marin sat with the infant in her arms and tried to think. She was holding the stolen prince of Valdros, the most wanted child in the realm. Every soldier, every bounty hunter, every loyal wolf in 8 kingdoms was searching for this baby. And she was a branded criminal, an exile, a monster in the eyes of the law. If they found her with him, they would never believe she'd saved his life. They would assume she'd taken him, that she was part of whatever conspiracy had stolen him from the palace in the first place. She should leave him somewhere. Somewhere he'd be found by someone who could return him safely. But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't do it. The storm would kill him before anyone arrived. And beyond that, something deeper held her in place. The moment she'd touched him, something had changed. A bond had formed that she didn't understand. "What are you?" she whispered, stroking his soft, dark hair. "And what did I just do?" The baby's only answer was to close his eyes and sleep. His breathing steady now, his heartbeat strong. Marin held him through the night, watching the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. She didn't know that her power had done more than save the child's life. She didn't know that the burst of energy she'd channeled had traveled through the bloodline mark, racing across hundreds of miles to reach the one person it was bonded to. She didn't know that Alpha King Theron was already riding north with 50 wolves at his back, following a thread that led directly to her. And she certainly didn't know that the thread pulling him wasn't just his son's. It was hers. They came on the 3rd night. Marin had managed to find food, a rabbit caught in an old snare she'd set weeks ago and forgotten. She'd made a thin broth, feeding drops to the baby from a rag dipped in the liquid. He'd taken to it eagerly, his strength returning faster than should have been possible. The mark on his chest still glowed faintly whenever she touched him. She'd tried to ignore it, tried not to think about what it meant or who might be looking for it, but denial could only last so long. The first sign was the horses. She heard them before she saw them, hooves pounding through snow, the sound carrying even over the dying wind. The second sign was the wolves. Not shifted, not yet. but close. She could feel them approaching, their presence pressing against her senses like a weight. Powerful, organized, military. Dread pooled in her stomach. She grabbed the baby and pressed herself against the back wall of the cabin as far from the door as possible. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. She was trapped. The door exploded inward. Wolves poured through the opening, their weapons drawn, and their eyes scanning every corner of the cramped space. They moved with precision, with training. And these weren't bandits or bounty hunters. These were royal soldiers. And behind them, stepping through the shattered doorway like winter itself had taken human form, was a man who made Marin's wolf whimper in submission. He was tall, impossibly tall. His hair was silver white, falling past his shoulders like frost. His features were sharp, beautiful in a way that was almost cruel. Cheekbones that could cut glass and eyes the color of a frozen lake. But it was his presence that stole her breath. The raw power radiating from him pressed down on every wolf in the room, a dominance so complete it felt like the air itself had grown heavier. Alpha King Theron of Valdros. His eyes found her instantly, found the baby in her arms, and then those eyes dropped to her forehead, to the brand she couldn't hide. His expression didn't change. And it was already carved from stone, cold and merciless and utterly unreadable. "Give me my son," he said. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. There was no rage in it, no heat. Just the calm certainty of a man who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation. Marin's arms tightened around the baby involuntarily. "I found him," she whispered. "In the snow. He was dying. I didn't take him. I swear I didn't." I said. Theron stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. "Give me my son." The baby stirred in her arms, and then, for the first time since she'd found him, he began to cry. It was a sharp, piercing wail, the kind of cry that spoke of fear, of being separated from safety. Several of the soldiers winced at the sound. Theron stopped, his eyes fixed on the infant, something flickering behind the ice. Pain, perhaps. Or longing. "Give him to me," he repeated, but his voice was softer now. Marin knew she had no choice. She stepped forward on trembling legs and held the baby out toward the king. Theron reached for his son. The moment his hands touched the child, the crying intensified. The baby thrashed, his tiny face contorted with distress, his screams echoing off the cabin walls. Theron froze. His son was fighting him, straining away from his touch, reaching back toward the stranger who had held him, reaching back toward Marin. "What did you do to him?" one of the soldiers demanded, stepping forward with his blade raised. "Nothing." Marin backed away, her hands raised. "I healed him. That's all. He was dying when I found him. I used my power to save him." "Your power?" Theron's gaze snapped to the brand on her forehead. "You're Veilborn." It wasn't a question. The mark told him everything he needed to know. Veilborn were forbidden. Their abilities were considered unnatural, dangerous, tainted. For centuries, they had been hunted, branded, executed. And now one had touched his son. "Kill her," the soldier said. "She's contaminated the prince with—" Silence. Theron's voice cut through the room like a blade. The soldier's mouth snapped shut. The baby was still crying, still reaching for Marin. Theron looked down at his son, at the tears streaming down those tiny cheeks, at the desperate way he strained toward the branded Omega across the room. Something shifted in the Alpha King's expression. Something that might have been calculation, or might have been something else entirely. "You healed him," he said slowly. "Yes." "He was dying." "And you saved him." "Yes." "And now he won't let anyone else hold him." Marin swallowed. "I don't know why. I swear, the bond just formed. I didn't mean for it to happen." Theron stared at her for a long moment. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, his small body still turned toward her, his hands still reaching. Then the Alpha King made a decision. "You're coming with me." Marin's heart dropped. To be executed? For the first time, something flickered across his face. It might have been surprise. It might have been amusement. It was gone too quickly to tell. "To care for my son," he said. "Clearly he's bonded to you. Until that bond fades, you will remain at the palace as his caretaker." "I'm a criminal," Marin heard herself say. "I'm branded. Why, your court will never accept." "My court will accept what I tell them to accept." Theron turned toward the door, his silver hair catching the firelight. "You have 1 hour to gather your things." He paused at the threshold, not looking back. "And understand this clearly, Omega. You will care for my son. You will want for nothing while you do. But do not expect anything more from me. I am not capable of kindness. I am not capable of warmth. And I am certainly not capable of trusting a Veilborn who touched my air without permission." He stepped into the snow. "You exist now only because my son needs you. The moment he doesn't, neither will you." Then he was gone, leaving Marin alone with 50 royal soldiers and a baby who was finally quiet in her arms. She looked down at the infant, at the mark glowing softly on his chest, at the dark eyes watching her with an intelligence far beyond his months. "What have you gotten me into?" she whispered. The baby simply reached up and touched her face. And somewhere in the distance, riding ahead of his men through the frozen night, Alpha King Theron pressed his palm against the mark on his chest and tried to ignore the second thread that now pulsed alongside his son's. A thread that led directly to the branded Omega he'd just claimed. A thread that whispered a word his wolf had never spoken in all his 32 years of life. Mate. He ignored it. He would keep ignoring it, because the last person who had held that title had been ripped from him in ways he still couldn't speak aloud. Lysara had died in his arms, and he had sworn on her grave that he would never let another woman close enough to suffer the same fate. He didn't know that fate had other plans, and neither did Marin. The palace of Valdros rose from the frozen landscape like a blade thrust into the sky. Its spires were carved from black stone veined with silver, its walls impossibly high, its gates forged from iron that had never known rust. Marin had never seen anything so terrifying in her life. The journey had taken 2 days. 2 days of riding in a covered carriage with the baby pressed against her chest and armed guards at every window. 2 days of Theron riding ahead, never looking back, and never acknowledging her existence. She'd tried to prepare herself for what awaited. The hostility, the suspicion, the inevitable moment when someone would see her brand and demand her execution. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The carriage stopped in a courtyard filled with wolves. Nobles in fine furs, servants in palace livery, soldiers in ceremonial armor, all of them watching, all of them silent. When Marin stepped out with the baby in her arms, the whispers began immediately. "Is that the prince? Thank the gods he's alive." "But who is she? Why is she holding him? Look at her forehead. Is that a brand? Veilborn. She's Veilborn. What is she doing with the heir?" Marin kept her head down, her arms tightening around the infant. Little Tavian, as she'd learned his name was, slept peacefully against her shoulder, oblivious to the hatred gathering around them. A woman pushed through the crowd. Older, elegant, with silver hair piled high and eyes that cut like broken glass. She wore the crest of the royal household on her breast. "Your Majesty," she addressed Theron as he dismounted. "We are overjoyed at the prince's return. But surely this creature," her gaze raked over Marin with undisguised contempt, "will not be permitted to remain. She bears the mark of the condemned." The courtyard fell silent. Every eye turned to the king. Theron stood motionless, his expression carved from the same stone as his palace. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke. "This woman saved my son's life. She found him dying in the snow and used her abilities to heal him. Without her, the prince would be dead." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Be that as it may," the silver-haired woman pressed. "She is veil-born. The law demands—" "I am the law." Theron's voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The words silenced everything. "And I say she stays. She will serve as the prince's caretaker until I decide otherwise. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or questions her presence without my permission will answer to me personally." He turned to address the entire courtyard, his presence pressing down on every wolf present. "Is that understood?" Silence. Then, one by one, heads bowed in submission. The silver-haired woman's jaw tightened, but she too inclined her head. "As you command, Your Majesty." Theron didn't acknowledge her. He turned to Corin. "Take her to the East Wing, the chambers adjoining the nursery. Ensure she has everything she needs." Then, without another glance at Marin, he strode toward the palace and disappeared through the great doors. Marin stood frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs. He'd defended her, publicly, in front of his entire court. She didn't know what to do with that. Corin appeared at her elbow, his scarred face unreadable. "This way, my lady." "I'm not a lady," Marin murmured. "You are now." He led her toward a side entrance, away from the staring crowd. "At least until His Majesty says otherwise. I'd suggest you get used to it." The chambers she was given were larger than her entire cabin, a bed with silk sheets, a fireplace already roaring, a bathing room with heated water, windows that overlooked snow-covered gardens, and a door that connected directly to the nursery where Tavian would sleep. It was more luxury than she'd ever known, more than she deserved. But as the servants left and silence fell, Marin couldn't shake the feeling crawling up her spine. She moved to the window, looking down at the courtyard below. The silver-haired woman was still there, and she was staring directly up at Marin's window. Her lips moved. Marin couldn't hear the words, but she could read them clearly. "This isn't over." Then the woman turned and vanished into the shadows. A chill crawled down Marin's spine. She was safe for now. The king had made sure of that. But for how long? 3 weeks passed. Marin fell into a rhythm. She woke with Tavian, fed him, bathed him, and played with him in the nursery while snow fell endlessly outside. She sang songs her mother had taught her before everything had gone wrong. She watched him grow stronger each day, his smiles coming easier, his laughter filling the cold stone chambers with warmth. She tried not to think about what would happen when he no longer needed her. The servants assigned to her were kind enough, if distant. They brought food, drew baths, and kept the fires burning. None of them mentioned her brand, and though she caught them looking when they thought she didn't notice, the court was another matter. Whispers followed her everywhere, in the corridors, in the gardens, in the great hall where she sometimes ate her meals alone at a small table far from the nobles. They called her the king's pet, the branded nursemaid, the veil-born stain. She ignored it. She'd endured worse. What she couldn't ignore was Theron. He visited the nursery every evening without fail. Always at the same hour, just as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. He would enter without knocking, cross to Tavian's crib, and simply stand there, watching his son sleep. He never spoke to Marin during these visits, barely acknowledged her presence, but she could feel his awareness of her like a physical weight. He could sense the way his attention flickered to her, even as his eyes remained fixed on the baby. Tonight was different. Tonight, when Theron arrived, Tavian was still awake. The baby saw his father and immediately began to fuss, his small arms reaching toward Marin instead of the king. Theron's expression didn't change, but Marin saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, the kind that came from being rejected by someone you loved more than breath. He's still not comfortable with me, Theron said quietly. It was the first words he'd spoken directly to her in days. Marin hesitated. He's learning. It takes time. It's been 3 weeks. He was traumatized, stolen from everything he knew, abandoned to die. She kept her voice gentle. He needs patience. Theron was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached toward the crib. Tavian began to cry. The king's hand froze mid-air. Something shattered behind his eyes. Though his face remained perfectly composed, he withdrew his hand. Perhaps, he said, his voice hollow, some bonds cannot be rebuilt. He turned to leave. Wait. The word escaped Marin before she could stop it. Theron paused at the door. May I try something? She asked. With your permission? He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Marin took that as consent. She lifted Tavian from the crib, whispering soothing words until his crying softened to sniffles. Then carefully, she crossed the room to stand beside the king. Give me your hand, she said. Theron looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Please, she added, trust me. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. He extended his hand, palm up. Marin took it. His skin was cold. Not unnaturally so, like the stories about the cursed kings of old, but cold, nonetheless. As if warmth was something his body had forgotten how to produce. She placed his hand against her own chest, just above her heart, with Tavian cradled between them. Feel my heartbeat, she said softly. He's learned that rhythm over 3 weeks. He associates it with safety. Let him learn that your rhythm is safe too. Theron stood rigidly, every muscle tense, but he didn't pull away. Tavian whimpered, then slowly quieted. His small head turned, his dark eyes fixing on his father's face. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, hesitantly, the baby reached out and touched Theron's jaw. The king inhaled sharply. There, Marin whispered. You see? He just needs time, and patience, and someone to show him the way. Theron's eyes dropped to her face. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the shadows beneath his eyes, the tightness around his mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and endless grief. And she could feel something else. A tremor in his hand, a flutter in his pulse. You're unwell, she said without thinking. Theron pulled back immediately, his walls slamming into place. I'm fine. Your heartbeat is none of your concern? His voice was ice again, all warmth gone. You care for my son. That is the extent of your duties. He strode to the door and yanked it open. But before he left, he paused. Didn't turn around. Didn't look at her. Thank you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. For what you did just now. Then he was gone. Marin stood in the empty nursery, Tavian sleeping peacefully in her arms, her own heart racing for reasons she didn't want to examine. But as she moved to settle the baby in his crib, something caught her eye. A shadow passing by the window. A flicker of movement in the garden below. She crossed to the glass and peered out. A figure stood among the snow-covered hedges, wrapped in a dark cloak, face hidden by a hood. They were looking up at the nursery window, looking directly at Tavian. Then, as if sensing her gaze, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness. Fear coiled tight in her chest. Someone was watching them, and something told her it wasn't a friend. She should have told someone. That was the thought that haunted Marin for the next 3 days. She should have reported the figure in the garden, should have alerted the guards, should have told Theron. But what would she say? That she'd seen a shadow? A cloaked stranger who had vanished before she could get a clear look? They already thought she was dangerous, unstable, a Veilborn who couldn't be trusted. Adding paranoid to the list wouldn't help anyone. So she stayed silent. And she watched. She watched the servants who came and went, watched the guards who patrolled the corridors, watched the nobles who occasionally passed by the nursery wing with 2 casual glances toward the door. And she watched Theron. He came every evening now, staying longer each time. Sometimes he held Tavian, his large hands impossibly gentle as they cradled his son. Sometimes he just sat in the chair by the fire and watched Marin sing the baby to sleep. They talked. Small things at first. The weather, the kingdom, the wolves who served in the palace. But slowly, carefully, and the conversations grew deeper. His mother loved to sing to him, Theron said one night, his voice distant. Lysara. She had a voice like spring rain, gentle, cleansing. Marin paused her lullaby. It was the first time he'd mentioned the former queen. What happened to her? She asked quietly. Theron was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. She died giving birth to Tavian, he finally said. The healers couldn't save her. Some said it was the curse. The curse? His jaw tightened. A legend. A lie. Nothing more. But the way he said it told Marin he didn't believe that. Not entirely. What does the legend say? She pressed, though she knew she shouldn't. Theron's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something raw behind the ice, something wounded. It says that any woman who truly bonds with a king of Valdros will die, that we are destined to destroy the ones we love. His voice was bitter. My father lost his mate before I was born, his father before him. Every king in our line has buried the woman they loved most. Marin's heart ached. And you believe this? I believe Lysara is dead. I believe she died because she was bonded to me. He looked away. And I believe I will never allow another woman to suffer the same fate. The finality in his words should have been a warning, should have made Marin pull back, build her own walls, protect herself from the impossible. Instead, she found herself crossing the room. She knelt beside his chair, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes. May I try something? She asked for the second time. Theron looked at her warily. What? Your heartbeat. It's been irregular since the night we met. Odd, I felt it every time we've touched. She held up her hands. I'm a healer. Let me help. No one can help. You don't know that. I know that every healer in the kingdom has tried. I know that the curse... Perhaps they were looking for the wrong thing. Marin met his gaze steadily. I'm Veilborn, remember? My power isn't like theirs. Let me try. Please. Something flickered across his face. Resistance, fear, and beneath it all, the tiniest spark of hope. Very well, he said. Try. Marin placed her hands on his chest, directly over his heart. The moment her palms made contact, she felt it. A wrongness deep inside him. Not a physical ailment, but something darker. Something that coiled around his heart like chains, squeezing, suffocating. Magic. Old magic. The kind that had been there for so long it had become part of him. This isn't a natural condition, she breathed. This is a curse. A real one. Someone put this on your bloodline. Theron went rigid beneath her hands. What do you see? Marin closed her eyes, pushing her power deeper. Images flashed through her mind. A woman with silver hair standing over a cradle. Words spoken in a language she didn't recognize, blood dripping onto stone. And then, clearer than anything else, a face she recognized. The silver-haired woman from the courtyard, the one who had called for Marin's execution. Who is Lady Valora? Marin asked suddenly. Theron's hand shot up and grabbed her wrist, pulling her hands from his chest. His eyes were blazing. How do you know that name? I saw her. In my vision. She was standing over a cradle, speaking words of power. Theron's face went pale, paler than she'd ever seen it. That's impossible, he said. Valora is my father's sister. She's been a loyal member of this court for 40 years. She helped raise me after my mother died. I know what I saw. You saw wrong. He released her wrist and stood, putting distance between them. Valora would never... She couldn't... He stopped. His hand pressed against his chest. His breathing had gone ragged. Theron? Marin rose to her feet. What's wrong? Nothing. But his voice was strained. You should go. Return to the nursery. This conversation is over. But I said go. The command hit her like a physical force, his alpha power pressing down on her wolf, demanding obedience. Marin stumbled backward, her heart racing. She fled. Back in her chambers, she pressed her back against the door and tried to breathe. Her hands were shaking. And her power was still buzzing beneath her skin, still showing her fragments of that vision. Lady Valora, standing over a cradle. Not Theron's cradle. She realized suddenly. Tavion's. Marin's blood ran cold. The figure in the garden. The one watching the nursery. It hadn't been a stranger. She ran to the window and looked out at the snow-covered grounds below. Empty now. Silent. But in the distance, moving through the shadows toward the palace gates, she saw a cloaked figure slip through a side door, and beside them, walking with quiet purpose, was another shape. A woman with silver hair that gleamed in the moonlight. Marin didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply ran. She burst through the nursery doors to find Tavion's crib empty. No guards, no servants, no baby. Just a single note pinned to the silk sheets. She found him once. She won't find him again. Marin screamed. Marin didn't remember running through the palace, didn't remember shouting for guards or pushing past servants who tried to stop her. All she knew was the cold night air hitting her face as she burst through a side entrance and into the snow. Tracks. Fresh tracks leading toward the northern gate. She followed them without hesitation, her wolf surging to the surface, lending her speed and strength she didn't know she possessed. The snow was deep, the night was black, and somewhere ahead of her, someone had taken the child she'd sworn to protect. The tracks led into the forest beyond the palace walls. Marin plunged into the trees, branches scratching her face, her lungs burning with every breath. And then she heard it. A baby's cry. Tavion. She ran faster, following the sound until she burst into a clearing lit by flickering torchlight. 3 figures stood in the center, cloaked and hooded. One of them held Tavion, who was screaming, thrashing, reaching toward something only he could sense, reaching toward her. Stop! Marin's voice tore through the clearing. The figures spun. One of them laughed, a cold, brittle sound. The branded nursemaid, how predictable. The speaker stepped forward, pushing back her hood. Lady Valora. Her silver hair gleamed in the torchlight, her elegant features twisted with contempt. You should have stayed in your room, little Omega, Valora said. This doesn't concern you. You're stealing the prince. Marin's voice shook with fury. Again. You're the one who took him the first time. Clever girl. Valora's smile was razor-sharp. Yes, and I arranged for his removal. The child was supposed to die in that blizzard. A tragic accident. The king, grief-stricken, would have had no choice but to name a new heir. Her eyes glittered. My grandson, perhaps. Someone I could control. You're insane. I'm practical. Valora gestured to her companions. Kill her. Make it look like wolves. Wild ones. Not ours. The 2 cloaked figures advanced. Marin didn't think. She simply acted. Her power erupted from her chest in a wave of golden light. It struck the first attacker and sent him flying backward into a tree. The second hesitated, and that hesitation cost him. Marin's power wrapped around him like chains, holding him frozen in place. Valora's eyes widened. Impossible. Your abilities were supposed to be bound. The brand suppressed my power. Audit didn't destroy it. Marin advanced on the older woman, her hands glowing with light she'd never known she possessed. And you made a mistake, Valora. You left Tavian with me for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of healing him, bonding with him, pouring my power into him every single day. She reached out and pulled Tavian from Valora's grip. The baby immediately quieted, nestling against her chest. My power isn't just mine anymore, Marin said. It's his too. And through him, it's connected to every drop of royal blood in this kingdom. Valora's face went pale. You don't know what you've done. I saved him, twice now. You've doomed yourself. Valora laughed, but there was fear in it. The curse on the Valdros bloodline doesn't just kill mates, you foolish girl. It kills anyone who bonds too closely with the royal line. Anyone who threatens to become family. Ice flooded Marin's veins. What? Why do you think I've survived so long in this court? I learned centuries ago never to let myself truly care. Valora backed away, her eyes wild. But you've bonded with the prince. And if my nephew feels for you what I suspect he does, you're already dead. You're lying. Am I? Valora smiled, cruel and knowing. Ask him. Ask Theron why his heart beats wrong. Ask him what happens to every woman who gets too close. Ask him why he pushes everyone away. Hoofbeats thundered through the forest. Valora's head snapped toward the sound. This isn't over, she hissed. Then she shifted, her body transforming into a silver wolf that vanished into the darkness between one heartbeat and the next. Marin stood alone in the clearing, Tavian crying softly in her arms, as 50 royal wolves burst through the trees with their king at the front. Theron leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped. His eyes found her immediately, scanning her for injuries, then dropping to his son. Tavian. The word was torn from him. Is he? He's fine. Marin held the baby out. He's safe. Theron took his son with shaking hands. For a moment, just a moment, his composure cracked. He pressed his forehead against Tavian's, breathing deeply, his whole body trembling with relief. Then his eyes lifted to Marin. You saved him again, he said. Valora took him. She admitted to arranging the first kidnapping. She wanted him dead so she could control the succession. Theron's expression hardened into something terrifying. Valora. She escaped, shifted, and ran. She won't get far. He turned to Corin. Find her. Every wolf in the kingdom hunts until she's captured. Corin nodded and disappeared into the trees with half the soldiers. Theron turned back to Marin. In the torchlight, she could see how pale he was, how the hand not holding Tavian was pressed against his chest. You're hurting, she said. It's nothing. It's not nothing. It's the curse. She stepped closer. Valora told me about it, the real truth, that it doesn't just kill your mates. It kills anyone who bonds too closely with your bloodline. Theron's jaw tightened. She had no right. Is it true? Silence. The kind that was its own answer. Theron. Marin's voice broke. Is it true that caring for you is a death sentence? He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw everything he'd been hiding. The grief, the fear, the desperate, an impossible longing he'd been fighting since the moment they met. Yes, he whispered. It's true. Marin felt tears burning her eyes. Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me stay? Let me bond with Tavian? Let me... Because I'm selfish. His voice cracked. Because every moment you've been here has been the first light I've known in years. Because my son smiles now. Because when I'm near you, the cold inside me finally feels bearable. He reached out and touched her face with his free hand, his fingers trembling against her cheek. Because I have tried so hard not to love you, he said, and I have failed. Marin's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same breath. Theron, don't. He pulled back, his walls slamming into place. Don't say it. If you feel anything for me, keep it buried. It's the only way to save yourself. He turned away, carrying Tavian toward the horses. Marin stood in the clearing, tears freezing on her cheeks, watching him go. She loved him. She knew that now with absolute certainty, and apparently, that love was going to kill her. But as she followed him back toward the palace, a single thought burned through her despair. Valora had lived in this court for decades, had been close to the royal bloodline for generations, and she was still alive. If she'd found a way to survive the curse, then there had to be a way to break it. Marin just had to find it. The palace was in chaos. Word of Valora's betrayal spread like wildfire. Nobles who had trusted her for decades now whispered about what else she might have done. Old deaths were re-examined, old accidents questioned. And in the midst of it all, Marin sat vigil beside Tavian's crib and refused to leave. Theron hadn't spoken to her since the forest. He'd retreated to his study, surrounded himself with advisors and generals, and thrown himself into the hunt for his treacherous aunt. But Marin could feel him. Through whatever connection had formed between them, she could sense his presence like a second heartbeat. Could feel when the pain in his chest grew worse. Could tell when his walls crumbled just a little in the dark hours of the night. On the third day, she couldn't take it anymore. She left Tavian with the guards she trusted and walked to the king's study. The servants tried to stop her. She walked past them. The guards at his door tried to turn her away. She looked them in the eyes and said, "Move." They moved. Theron looked up as she entered, his face gaunt. Dark circles carved beneath his eyes. Maps and documents covered every surface. He looked like he hadn't slept since the forest. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know." She closed the door behind her. "But I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone." Theron's expression flickered. "Marin, please, let me finish." He fell silent. Marin crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "You know I'm branded," she began. "You know they call me Veilborn, that my abilities are forbidden. But you don't know why I was exiled." She took a breath. "There was a man, Brennan. He was my betrothed. Our match was arranged when we were children, long before my power manifested. He was kind to me, gentle. I thought I might learn to love him one day." The words came harder now. "But then I discovered my abilities, healing, light, the power to sense life force and manipulate it. I kept it hidden for years, terrified of what would happen if anyone found out. But Brennan saw me once, healing a wounded bird. He didn't report me. He said he didn't care what I was." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "And then he died." Theron's eyes were fixed on her, unreadable. "He was found in our village square, burned from the inside out. Witnesses said they saw golden light around him before he collapsed. My light. Everyone assumed I'd killed him in a fit of rage, that my Veilborn power had finally shown its true nature." She looked down at her hands. "They branded me, exiled me. My own mother watched them do it and said nothing. And I believed them. I believed I must have done it, that my power had corrupted, and that I was the monster they said I was." "But you didn't do it." Theron's voice was quiet. "Did you?" Marin looked up, startled by the certainty in his tone. "How can you know that?" "Because I've watched you heal my son every day for a month. Because your power is light and life, not destruction. Because every time you touch someone, you make them better, not worse." He leaned forward. "What really happened to Brennan?" "I don't know." The confession tore from her. "I've replayed that day 1,000 times. I wasn't even there when he died. I was in the forest, gathering herbs. By the time I returned, he was already dead and the mob was calling for my blood. Someone framed you. That's what I eventually realized. But I never knew who or why. Theron was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the desk and took her hand. His touch was still cold, but gentler than she'd ever felt it. Valora's power is fire, he said quietly. Marin's heart stopped. What? She never uses it openly, claims it faded years ago, but I've seen glimpses. Golden flames that burn from within. His grip tightened on her hand. What was your village called? Thornwick, in the eastern provinces. Theron's jaw clenched. Valora visited Thornwick 6 years ago. Some diplomatic mission for my father. I remember because she returned early, claiming there had been an unfortunate incident with a local man. The room spun. She killed Brennan, Marin breathed. She killed him and framed me. But why? I was nobody. A healer's apprentice in a village that barely had a name. Theron released her hand and stood, moving to the window. His back was rigid, his shoulders tense. Valora sees threats before they exist, he said. She eliminates them before they can grow. A Veilborn with healing power, betrothed to a man with connections to minor nobility. He turned to face her. You might have risen, might have gained influence, might have eventually threatened whatever plans she was cultivating. So she destroyed my life as a precaution? That's exactly the kind of thing she would do. Rage flooded through Marin, hot and pure and righteous. Where is she? She demanded. Your soldiers have been hunting for 3 days. Have they found her? Theron's expression darkened. No, she's vanished completely. But we found something else. A hidden chamber beneath her quarters. Documents going back decades. Records of every accident that befell women who grew too close to the royal bloodline. Her stomach dropped. She's been killing them. All of them. Your mother. Your father's mate. Lysara. Yes. The curse isn't supernatural at all. It's her. Partially. Theron's hand pressed against his chest, and Marin saw him wince. The curse is real. I feel it every day, growing stronger. But Valora found a way to use it, to amplify it, to ensure that any woman who bonded with a Valdros king would die before the bond could fully form. Why? Control. Power. If the kings of Valdros could never fully mate, could never have partners who might counsel them, guide them, and share their rule, he laughed bitterly. We would always be alone, always vulnerable, always dependent on the family members who remained. On her. On her. Marin rose from her chair and crossed to him. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the wrongness coiled around his heart. Let me try to heal you, she said. Properly this time. Let me see if I can break whatever she's done. It could kill you. Loving you might kill me anyway. She met his eyes. I'd rather die trying to save you than live knowing I didn't try at all. Something broke in Theron's expression. All the walls, all the ice, all the careful control he'd maintained for so long. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her hair. That's not your decision to make. She tilted her face up and kissed him. The moment their lips met, light exploded through the room. The light was everywhere. It poured from Marin's hands, her chest, and her very skin. Golden and warm and alive, flooding through her into Theron, seeking out the darkness coiled around his heart. She could see it now. The curse. A web of black threads woven so tightly around his core that it had become part of him. And at the center of that web, like a spider waiting to strike, was a fragment of consciousness. Valora. She'd bound herself to the curse. That was how she'd survived so long, how she'd maintained her power, how she'd killed so many without ever being present. A piece of her existed inside every king of Valdros, watching, waiting, destroying anyone who got too close. I see you, Marin said, her voice echoing strangely in the golden space between heartbeats. I know what you are. Laughter rippled through the darkness. Valora's voice, cold and amused. Foolish girl. You think you can defeat something that's existed for centuries? I was weaving curses before your grandmother was born. Maybe. Marin pushed her power deeper, wrapping it around the black threads. But you made a mistake. Oh? And what was that? You used fire to frame me, fire that burns from within. Marin smiled grimly. You forgot that fire is just another form of energy, and energy is what I heal. She pulled. The scream that tore through the darkness was inhuman. The black threads thrashed, fought, tried to dig deeper into Theron's heart. But Marin held on. Drew on every ounce of power she possessed. Drew on the bond she'd formed with Tavian. Drew on the connection humming between her and Theron. And she burned the curse away. When she opened her eyes, she was on the floor of the study. Theron was beside her, unconscious but breathing. His color was better than she'd ever seen it. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. And standing in the doorway, her silver hair wild, her elegant features twisted with fury, was Lady Valora herself. You broke it, Valora snarled. 300 years of work and you broke it. Marin struggled to her feet. Her power was drained, her body exhausted. She could barely stand, but she stood anyway. It's over, Valora. The curse is broken. You can't hide behind it anymore. You think that was my only weapon? Valora raised her hands and flames erupted around her fingers. Golden fire that Marin recognized instantly. The same fire that had killed Brennan. I should have killed you in Thornwick, Valora hissed. Should have burned you alongside your pathetic betrothed. But I thought exile would be enough. Thought you'd die in the wilderness like all the other discarded Omegas. Sorry to disappoint. You won't survive disappointing me twice. Valora hurled the fire directly at Marin's chest. Marin didn't have time to dodge, didn't have the power to deflect, but she didn't have to. A body slammed into her from the side, knocking her to the ground as the flames sailed overhead. Theron, awake, alive. His gray eyes blazing with fury as he rose to face his aunt. You killed my mother, he said, his voice deadly calm. You killed Lysara. You tried to kill my son. I did what was necessary. Valora's composure cracked, revealing something wild and desperate beneath. The kings of Valdros were growing too powerful, too independent. Someone had to control them. Someone had to ensure the bloodline remained manageable. You mean someone had to ensure you remained in power? I made this kingdom, Valora screamed. I shaped it, guided it, and protected it from rulers too foolish to see the threats around them. And this is how you repay me? By choosing some branded Omega over your own blood? Theron smiled. It was the coldest expression Marin had ever seen. She is my blood now, he said. Or she will be, the moment I mark her as my mate. Valora's face contorted with rage. She raised her hands again, flames building, and froze. Corin stood behind her, a blade pressed to her throat. The king gave orders, the commander said flatly. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. He pressed the blade harder. Please give me a reason to choose the second option. Valora's flames died. Her hands dropped to her sides. This isn't over, she whispered. The curse may be broken, but I am not the only one who fears what the Valdros line could become. Others will come. Others will try. Let them try, Theron said. I'll be waiting. He nodded to Corin, who dragged Valora from the room. Then he turned to Marin, and all the hardness melted from his face. Are you hurt? He asked, crossing to her in 2 strides. I'm fine. She touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady and warm at last. You're warm. I know. He captured her hand and pressed it harder against his heart. I can feel it. The cold is gone. The weight I've carried my entire life. He shook his head in wonder. You destroyed it. We destroyed it together. He pulled her into his arms, and this time when he held her, there was no ice between them. I love you, he said against her hair. I should have said it before, should have admitted it weeks ago, but I was so afraid. I know. She pulled back to look at his face. I love you too. This time when they kissed, no light exploded. But something else did. A bond. Forming between them like a golden thread, weaving their souls together in a way that could never be undone. Mate, her wolf whispered. Mate, his wolf answered. And for the first time in 300 years, a king of Valdros allowed himself to love without fear. 6 months later, the throne room of Valdros had never seen a celebration like this. Flowers hung from every pillar, their sweet scent filling the air. Musicians played in the galleries above, their melodies drifting down like snowflakes made of sound. And wolves from every corner of the kingdom had gathered to witness something many had believed impossible. The mating ceremony of Alpha King Theron and his chosen queen. Marin stood at the center of the dais, dressed in silver and gold, her dark hair woven with winter roses. The brand on her forehead was visible for all to see. She'd stopped hiding it months ago. It wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a mark of survival. Theron stood beside her, more handsome than she'd ever seen him. His silver hair was braided back from his face, his gray eyes soft with an emotion that still made her heart flutter every time she saw it. Love. Pure and unconditional, and completely, wonderfully warm. Before these witnesses, the high priest intoned, Do you, Theron of the Valdros bloodline, claim this woman as your mate, your queen, your partner in all things? I do. Theron's voice rang through the hall. I claim her with my heart, my soul, and every breath I will ever take. And do you, Marin of no bloodline, Marin of the Veilborn, Theron corrected quietly. Let the records show it. The priest blinked, then nodded. Marin of the Veilborn, do you claim this man as your mate? Your king? Your partner in all things? Marin smiled, tears pricking her eyes. I do. I claim him with everything I am and everything I will ever become. Then by the ancient laws and the blessing of the moon, I pronounce you bonded, mate to mate, heart to heart. The priest stepped back. You may mark your queen. Theron turned to her, his eyes asking permission even now. Marin tilted her head, baring her throat. His teeth sank into the soft skin where her neck met her shoulder, and light exploded through the hall. Golden and silver intertwined, the visual manifestation of their bond made visible for all to witness. When he pulled back, his mark gleamed on her skin. And when she rose on her toes to return the bite, her mark appeared on his throat in kind. The crowd erupted in cheers. Later, after the feasting and the dancing and the endless congratulations, Marin slipped away to the nursery. Tavian was awake, standing in his crib on wobbly legs, his dark eyes bright with excitement. At 10 months old, he was already trying to walk, already babbling words that almost made sense. Mama, he said, reaching for her. Marin's heart melted. She lifted him into her arms and pressed a kiss to his forehead. Hello, my little prince. Did you miss me? He answered by grabbing a fistful of her hair and laughing. He's been waiting for you. Theron appeared in the doorway, his ceremonial clothes already half removed. Wouldn't settle for anyone else? Like father, like son. Theron crossed the room and wrapped his arms around both of them, his chin resting on Marin's head. I never thought I could have this, he said quietly. A family, a mate, a future that didn't end in cold and loneliness. And now? Now I can't imagine any other life. Marin leaned back against his chest, Tavian nestled between them, and let herself feel the impossible reality of the moment. She had come to this kingdom branded and broken, a criminal with nothing but the clothes on her back. She had saved a dying baby in a blizzard and stumbled into a fate she'd never imagined. And now she was queen, mate to a king who loved her, mother to a prince who would never know the curse that had haunted his bloodline. Valora's trial had ended 2 months ago. She'd been found guilty of 17 murders spanning 3 generations. The court had wanted execution. Theron had chosen something worse: imprisonment. In a cell warded against magic. For the rest of her very long life. Some deaths are too quick, he'd told Marin privately. Let her spend eternity remembering what she lost. Justice, Marin had learned, didn't always look the way you expected, but it was still justice. There's something I should tell you, she said now, turning in his arms to face him. Theron's brow furrowed. What is it? When I healed you, when I broke the curse. She bit her lip. I felt something change inside me too. Some of your power transferred to me, and some of mine to you. I know. He smiled. I've been meaning to mention that I accidentally healed a stable boy's broken arm yesterday, by touching it. Marin laughed. You're handling it well. I had a good teacher. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. What else did you feel? She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. I felt a new life beginning. Theron went completely still. You're pregnant. About 8 weeks, according to the healer. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his laughter echoing through the nursery, Tavian squealing with delight between them. A baby, he said, setting her down and cradling her face in his hands. Our baby. Our baby, she confirmed. He kissed her, deep and warm and full of promise. And, somewhere in the palace, a new servant was beginning her first day of work. A young Omega with dark hair and bright eyes, who had arrived from a distant village with excellent references and an eagerness to serve in the royal nursery. No one noticed the small smile that crossed her face when she heard the king's laughter echoing through the halls. No one saw the glint of silver in her eyes that matched Valora's exactly. And no one knew that the true battle for the Valdros bloodline had only just begun. But that is a story for another time. Thank you for listening to this story. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know. Until next time.